But yeah.
Well, I don't know. The one thing that I have been really excited to be following is the March to Free Leonard Peltier. That is one of the longest walks that I've heard of in like the history of me being alive, and people doing long walks to Washington D.C. is it's 1,103 miles from Minneapolis to Washington D.C.
That's 103 miles further than the Proclaimers felt ready to walk when they sang their famous song.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I when I first heard about that, they're like, we're going to do a freedom march. I was like, oh, that's cool. To D.C. from Minneapolis. I was like, oh, damn. That's some commitment right there, which is good. I mean, the whole story, and so I wrote up a little bit of background. So for folks who are listening who don't know the story about Leonard Peltier, which there's a ton of great media you can find out about it. It's an incredible story. Yet another dark chapter in U.S. history
that persists to today.
Yeah, I mean, Leonard Peltier is one of the United States' longest-serving political prisoners. He's been in jail for almost 50 years, and he was originally imprisoned on false charges stemming from an FBI siege of a compound run by the American Indian Movement on the Pine Ridge Reservation in 1975. And, even the guy who prosecuted the case against Leonard Peltier has lobbied for him to be released. No one except the hardest right wing, cops and FBI people and politicians thinks Leonard Peltier should be in jail. And yet, despite all that, he still is. And so that's why you have this movement, this freedom march that just started a few days ago, going all the way from Minneapolis to DC. And so, I mean, that's really inspirational. And part of it is that there's a real urgency here. Because, I mean, since Leonard Peltier's been in prison for 46 years, he's getting pretty old. And it's pretty tough to survive in jail when you're young and healthy.
Yeah.
Much less when you're an elder.
COVID.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's they keep prisoners, especially political prisoners, in absolutely horrific conditions, solitary confinement. But then also when you have an opportunity to be around other people, they don't give you the protections you need to keep yourself safe from COVID. So, I mean, he's had several different health ailments as well as getting COVID because they wouldn't give him his booster shot at the right timing. And so it's his continued imprisonment is not only a political crime, which of course it is, but it's also, they are trying to kill him in prison. And so, it's really important that we support these movements to free him and really all the political prisoners. So I saw you have a list here, Lena, of all the places that the march is going to be going through.
Right, yeah. I mean, yesterday they had gone through Eau Claire. I mean, it's the 6th, so it was the 5th that they were going through Eau Claire, Wisconsin. On the 17th of this month, September, they'll be in Madison, Wisconsin. The 24th will be in Chicago, Illinois. On October 1st, they'll be in South Bend, Indiana. October 11th, Toledo, Ohio. October 19th, Cleveland, Ohio. October 28th, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And then on November 14th, they'll be in Washington, D.C. itself to march on Washington. And I just wanted to make sure to put all those dates out there so that you can look it up. I mean, they have a Facebook event page, and I'm sure they're on other social media to actually get the information out there as to how to participate, how the events on those days happen. But I highly encourage people to show up to these events. And I mean, I was noticing that there's a decent gap between Chicago and South Bend when it comes to dates. So I'm guessing they're going to be maybe spending a couple days kind of meandering through Chicago or something like that. So, I mean, keep an eye out for that because, showing solidarity with our indigenous, family is really important and, is essential to the fight that we have also as workers.
Yeah, and they're definitely going to need some support. I mean, I think some of the reasons there's plenty of days between relatively close together locations is because between a lot of these stops, there aren't really paths that are designed for walking.
Right.
There's really just like a lot of roads. I mean, I know from Pittsburgh to DC, there's pretty much a straight shot where you don't have to walk along the road at all. There's like a giant bike trail that goes across the entirety of Pennsylvania, but the Midwest is not friendly to walking long distances. So making it from Minneapolis like through Ohio is going to be a pretty huge feat for these folks, and I think just shows, you know, the level of commitment that they have to this cause.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've said, like, you know, if folks want to help out, which we of course absolutely advocate and recommend, there's a bunch of ways. Like there's a donation link that you can always send money to, and we'll put that in the show notes. But also, if they're passing through an area near you, like if you go to their media to see like when they're going to be there, like they are looking for people to just join the march, not the whole way. I mean, if you'd like to, I'm sure they would love to have people do that. But even if it's just in your own city, like. But like providing food, helping with a support vehicle. There's all sorts of different ways that folks can help out. So yeah, we really encourage, if the march is going through and you have, you know, some time where you might be able to help out, it would be really good, because like, you know, the struggle to free political prisoners is really important, because like one of the ways, you know, we did our whole series on the repressive state apparatus, and like one of the big ways that the U.S. secret police, the FBI, have tried to destroy left movements in the United States is by arresting and putting in jail for incredibly long prison terms all sorts of major leaders, you know, be they Black Panthers, be they, again, members of the American Indian movement, or all sorts of other, like, really inspirational revolutionary figures. I mean, obviously, you have people like Mumia Abu-Jamal, Mutulu Shakur, all sorts of people who have been in jail for, you know, decades purely because they were standing up for their oppressed communities. And so if we're going to be able to build and maintain resilient revolutionary movements, that means standing up for those that have been put in behind bars and fighting until they're freed. And so,
That's right.
You know, Leonard Peltier is exemplary of this, and it's really important that we support this struggle.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of supporting incarcerated or otherwise oppressed people who fight for the working class and other oppressed groups, everybody. This is your favorite labor podcast. We're an entirely listener-supported show. Thank you so much for any money you might be giving us on the Patreon. If you're not in the Discord yet, please get in there as soon as you can. It's completely free. If you are a patron and you don't have stickers yet, just message us on Patreon and we will get those to you right away. And if you want to help the show a little bit more, you can leave us a 5-star review wherever you think it will help. As long as we're talking about political repression and political violence, I suppose we'll follow up with the South African shack dwellers movement, where we have quite unfortunately seen yet another organizer of their movement assassinated. So we talked about this before when we discussed, do we have the names of the other people who were shot?
Ayanda Nagila was the first one that we talked about. I mean, there have been a few of these. It's really tough. Like this has been a real site of really strong state repression. Like, because I mean, listeners will know that we've talked about this movement, Abalali Basamjondalo, which is, you know, the name in their language for the shack dwellers movement in South Africa, who are working to actually try and help the poorest segments of society there try and just build their own sustainable communities. And like, they're not out there like, you know, starting militia to go overthrow the South African government. They're starting small communes where they are having like poultry farms and vegetable gardens and like housing complexes that people can actually live in and be able to grow their own food. But that has been seen to be a huge threat to the capitalist elements in power in South Africa. And they've responded to that threat with continued escalating violence. And it's really, really tragic that this has once again resulted in the murder of another young organizer.
Yeah, it really puts the lie to the whole kind of myth that if you resist peacefully and you resist in like a polite way that doesn't like clog up streets or whatever, like that you won't be met with political violence. It's like you absolutely still will if you're effective in any way. and the kind of political violence that we're seeing. I mean, yet another young organizer in the movement was assassinated when 28-year-old Lindakule Mnguni, chairman of the Ekanana commune, it was killed in his home in Durban. 2 assassins broke down his door and riddled Mnguni and his wife with bullets, killing him and hospitalizing her. And witnesses say they recognized the assassins from the hit squad that murdered fellow organizer Ayanda Ngila back in March. So it seems like they're not even like trying to go through the precautions of hiring new people or trying to hide that this is a concerted effort or a concerted campaign of violence against these organizers. It seems like it's pretty much right out in the open. And they have been, the attacks have been led by the son and daughter of Simon Ngubane, who is a local leader of the ANC in Durban, who has been trying to get a hold of the land used by the Ekanana commune for sale on the local real estate market, sending frequent raids by gunmen, which have terrorized the commune for months in an attempt to drive the residents out, including at least 3 murders of organizers that we know of.
Yeah, I was watching an interview with one of the people who is associated with the Shack Dwellers movement, and they were saying that they literally go into these communities almost like daily or at least weekly and just fire guns just to like intimidate the people who are living there.
Yeah, it's crazy, and it's one of those things that just shows, because this often gets chalked up in a lot of other media to like, oh, well, this is just gang violence in an area because it's a poor community. Mm-hmm. But it's like every single one of these has had direct connections to the state and local governments. So like the fact that they're, attempt to write this off as just like, oh, it's the poor fighting the poor, as a way to cover up for the fact that this is a targeted assault on the poorest communities by the richest in the area. And especially because, the Shack Dwellers movement is an explicitly socialist movement. And that's like, you can see that just in the statements, like not only just by the explicit orientation of the group, but also their actual praxis. It's like they're focused on uplifting the poorest members of society and actually going out and doing that rather than just, talking about it. Because like before he was killed, like Mnguni himself had made statements about like why they're out there doing the work that they're doing. And so in a statement he said, quote, "When you say you're a socialist, the problem that you want to solve is the problem of poverty. But you can't solve it just by relying on ideas. We need action for collective ownership of land. When poor people commit themselves to politics, they don't commit themselves to mere ideas. We join politics because we have problems we want to solve," end quote.
Yeah, and the movement also said in a statement after Mnguni was killed, they said Mnguni knew that he had chosen to live and struggle in the shadow of death. He made it very clear in his calm and gentle way that he had chosen socialism or death, which is like, I mean, especially with the rampant levels of violence we've seen waged by state and capitalist actors in South Africa, not just against the Shack Dwellers movement, but for instance, against unions at places like the Clover dairy plants. It does seem like a place in the world where the contradictions and the consequences of trying to organize under the current system are extremely stark.
Yeah. Well, and just to outline that, I think that it's apt to point out here that when it comes to poverty in South Africa, 64% of black people in South Africa are in poverty, compared to 1% of white people and 6% of Indian and Asian people who also experience poverty. But I mean, like 64% of black people in Africa experience poverty. Like that is very clear, discrimination and a vestige of the former quote unquote apartheid state. I mean, like it's at least part of it that still exists.
Yeah, I mean, because it's one of those things where like we're not coming out here and saying that like the end of apartheid like didn't do anything. It obviously did. It was a momentous campaign by the people of South Africa and the ANC at the time to defeat the white supremacist regime and bring, the majority population, the indigenous population of South Africa back into power. But this has also shown that one of the biggest results of the fact that the ANC did not make a break from capitalism when it made that same break from apartheid has left so many of the material results of the apartheid system relatively untouched because, the worst overt aspects of it tend to be gone. You don't have people with restrictive movement. You don't have all of the overt racism, from the colonizers that you had under the apartheid regime. But because of the fact that capitalism, as we've talked about so many times, is inherently racist and inherently looks to divide groups against each other and to keep the poor poor and to keep the rich rich. Like, that's its function. So if you maintain that system, even when you have very real, incredible historic victories like the overturning of apartheid, the remnants of the capitalist system, and especially, now in the neoliberal era, like, that puts a huge restriction on how far you can go in being able to actually, bring people to true liberation. And so it also, I think that one of the things about this story that really stands out to me is because we hear so much from, liberal propaganda about how, like, socialists and communists they're so violent, and it's just like the USSR murdered a billion people or whatever, all the victims of communism nonsense. And because there's always this attempt to portray, people who are defending the poor, who are coming out there to oppose the systems of oppression and domination built into capitalism, to portray those people as violent because they want to change the system. But you could not see a starker, example of how much of a lie that is. Because the shack dwellers movement isn't sending gunmen into the rich parts of Durban to just go shoot up neighborhoods. They're helping people set up, again, vegetable gardens. They're helping people who were previously homeless, maybe living under a bridge somewhere, actually have a place to live. It may not, it's not going to be, it's not like a swanky luxury condo or something, but just having a roof over their heads. And that is being met with horrific violence from the capitalist class. And it's, I think, one of the starkest exposures of that it is, in fact, capitalism, which is inherently violent. And it is the struggle against poverty and the struggle against oppression that is the only way that we're going to ever overturn that. And so, all of our solidarity goes out to the shack dwellers movement. And, as horrible as these assassinations, these murders, these constant attacks are, I do think there is still a lot of inspiration we can draw, because this sort of thing would crush a lot of lesser movements. And yet, every time we've seen this happen, we see the shack dwellers movement continue to fight back, to continue to organize, to continue to fight for the people that are in the poorest conditions, and to try and, actually fight for a system that cares about everybody. And I think that level of discipline, that level of strength is something that we can really draw from in our, trying to draw inspiration for our own movements.
Forward to socialism, forward. Forward to communism, forward. Abash, capitalism, abash.
Absolutely. And to move to our next story, we're going to be talking about the multi-tiered system that we've covered in minor league and Major League Baseball. And one of the solutions that we had initially actually talked about on the show in regards to the way that, the minor league players had their own association, and in most other sports there was, the minor league, like in hockey, there's the smaller leagues, and then the major leagues are all in the same union. Well, the Major League Baseball Players Association, the union of the MLB, has actually begun organizing minor league players and has been handing out cards. And as of today, they have seen over 50% of minor league players sign up to join the MLBPA and form a single union rather than two unions, one that, honestly leaves a lot of the minor league players to, not have the conditions that allow them to make this very honestly difficult and occasionally harmful to people's bodies sport, a career.
Yeah, well, and it's not surprising that so much support for joining this union has been achieved so quickly, because as we talked about the last time we talked about minor league baseball players, they're expected to do basically just as much training, traveling, and paying for various expenses as major league players, and they're often paid pitifully small wages. I mean, some of them make as low as like the mid 20,000s of dollars per year, which like you can make that without committing yourself heart and soul to an athletic endeavor. And they're basically being strung along because a lot of them, will never get a chance to see the major leagues, but it's kind of assumed that you're supposed to just know when to quit. And, that if you're not going to make it in the minors, then you should just give up. And it's like, no, people come out to watch these folks play sports. Like, they should be compensated fairly for their time and their risk of injury and their training and their travel and everything else that comes with it.
Well, yeah, and their labor is the only thing that creates the sport that then generates billions and billions in dollars in profits for the owners who don't do any of that labor, who don't go out and put their body on the line, and who the fans are not paying to see.
Yeah.
They're reaping all this money while these minor league players are paid next to nothing, oftentimes forced to do work for like spring training for free. And we won't go through the whole thing because we've covered it on past shows, but like this has been a really, really great thing to see, because when we've talked about this in the past, one of the things that we've said is Major League Baseball players have a union, and it's one of the stronger unions in sports. So why don't they just bring the minor leaguers into that union? Because the whole idea is like, if you're in the minors, your goal is to get in the majors. So it only makes sense that one union should represent all of them. And it's so good to see that the union is finally taking that step. And so like we have a statement here from MLBPA Executive Director Tony Clark, who said, "Minor leaguers represent our game's future and deserve wages and working conditions that befit elite athletes who entertain millions of baseball fans nationwide. They're an important part of our fraternity, and we want to help them achieve their goals both on and off the field," end quote. And so a big part of how this all came about now is because of several years of advocacy from this group, Advocates for Minor Leaguers, who we sourced a lot of our information from on our past episodes, because they've been the ones going out there, like bringing in the stories from the minor leaguers and popularizing them, putting them out so people can actually hear, like, what are the awful conditions that these folks face, and putting pressure on the MLBPA to do the right thing, as they now finally are. And one of the, kind of neat things about that is that the Advocates for Minor Leaguers is now shutting down. And not because, they're like, now we don't have a purpose, but because the MLBPA offered staff positions to the advocates there.
That's the kind of organizing you love to see, where you're just like, oh, wow, this group was doing really good advocacy. Well, we better just let them keep doing it. Or we could take this bigger organization with more power and just give these people more institutional power.
Yeah. I mean, so it's really great news. I mean, like, as you said, like earlier in the episode, like this was only announced a few days ago, and they've already hit over half, like over 50% of minor leaguers sending cards back. So it's very exciting news for the Major League Baseball and minor league system. And
yeah, I mean, it is both, though. I mean, because the person is saying, I mean, the minor league players go into the major leagues. That is where the recruiting happens. And without lifting up the minor leagues, you are leaving people to languish in a multi-tiered system that actually causes more harm and reduces the quality of people's lives. And if you want, I mean, if they are committed to creating a great sport with a great, environment for the players, they have to talk about all of the players, including the ones that are in training or in these minor league programs.
Well, yeah,
Absolutely.
And I mean, it's obvious to the players who are paid pitifully little how much money the people who operate the stadiums and who manage the teams and everything are making. I mean, they're in there every day watching every school within 150 fucking miles bus in kids to watch the West Michigan Whitecaps and all run and eat a fucking pretzel between every inning. Like, that's money, hand over fist. Those pretzels are $9.50 They're probably
Right.
more now. So
Yeah. So the union, because they've already got, over half of the minor leaguers have already signed union cards. The union has now formally requested that Major League Baseball voluntarily recognize the desire of the players in the minors to join Major League Baseball. So we will see how that goes. It's
They're
one of those
notorious
things.
for fighting really hard and being really shitty and being like, we'll just lock you out. We'll wait. And so, I mean, like, I think there's going to be a fight here.
Yeah. I mean, on the other hand, and I mean, we are going into the end of the baseball season. So that I think actually might play a role in here where they might just try and stonewall and drag it out until next spring training. But I do think one of the things that helps here is that the MLBPA is one of those unions that has shown, unlike, say, the NFL union, has shown that they're actually willing to go on strike, because there have been plenty of times where there have been owners' attempts to break down free agency or get rid of guaranteed contracts. And the Players Association have been like, no, that's not happening. So, I mean, they've got a ton of leverage. So, yeah, I mean, while the owners are certainly not going to be excited about this and will probably try and, make their own threats against the union drive, I think this is exactly why, we've said for so long that it's like it has to be the major league union doing this, because it would be so much easier for owners to stonewall and lock out a union that's just the minor leaguers. Because they could say, whatever, if we have to have a lockout in just the minor leagues, we've still got our major league players. That's where the biggest capital B billions are coming from. But when they're all in the same union, and if you lock out the minor leaguers, the major leagues threaten to go on strike, that's so much more leverage right there.
I think that's a really great point.
As long as we're comparing union systems with more and less leverage, let's talk about a big gain for workers in Mexico.
Absolutely.
So in another huge win for independent unions in Mexico, 350 workers at an auto parts plant owned by VU Manufacturing, just a few miles from the U.S. border, voted to throw out the old company union and build their own organization. So this is on Wednesday, August 31st. Workers at the plant voted 186 to 101 in favor of joining the Mexican Workers League instead of the CTM. So this is the latest in a series of new independent unions, the Mexican Workers League, similar to SNITIES and Cintia that we talked about previously on the show, that have been formed to fight decades of company-controlled protection unions and business unions under the corrupt CTM, which is like a federation of unions, right? Similar to the AFL.
The Confederación de Trabajadores de México.
Right. So these workers at the VU manufacturing plant in Piedras Negras petitioned for a new union election a few months ago to get out from under the CTM. And recently, the company slashed bonuses for those workers who exceed a daily production quota by 30%. And the CTM refused to do anything about it. The plant also does not have air conditioning, despite temperatures routinely reaching triple digits during the summer months, and leaks in their roof leave pools of water all over the plant floor. I mean, these are the kinds of conditions that even if you just nominally have a union, you would expect you would be able to do something about. So I think that's really a testament to the failures of the CTM here.
Well, and I think that one of the things that really also highlights how the CTM is not for the workers is specifically how the union busting manifested from the company itself, where when this vote is coming down that allows the workers to change what union represents them to this independent union from the CTM, the company itself was not saying, no, buck both unions. They were saying, no, stick with the CTM. We really want you to still be in the Confederation of Workers of Mexico. And just so wait, if a company's advocating for a union, you really gotta take into consideration what this is looking at. We have a quote here from Veronica Arceli Rivera, who has worked at the Maquiladores, who for her whole adult life, who explained why she wanted this independent union, saying, I worked in various maquiladores, and all of them have had the CTM. I'm convinced the CTM is never going to do anything for the workers. Why? Because the company pays the CTM. It doesn't collect dues from the workers. And I think that also, I mean, like all of these things, the company advocating for the CTM, the fact that the CTM doesn't take dues from the workers
Right.
and instead gets all of their funding from the companies themselves shows the inherent corruption and class collaborationist elements of the CTM. And it really exemplifies the need to abolish the CTM as a union. And as we see more of these independent unions in Mexico show up, I think that we're really seeing that fight come to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, just the image of a company holding a captive audience meeting to tell workers to join a different, like, to stick with the current union is just so strange considering, like, the U.S. context. One thing I really just want to quickly shout out here is, like, we're getting all this from coverage from Labor Notes, and, like, Labor Notes has been out there at the forefront of this. Like, I have barely, like, there's a little bit of reporting on this in, like, the business press because they care about it because they're like, oh, no, these workers are getting unions that might actually do union stuff.
Right.
That's not what we want. Oh, no, our profit margins. But the people who have actually been going and talking to the workers, it's been like, as far as English press that I've seen, it's been pretty much just Labor Notes. So, you know, shout out to them as usual. But yeah, like the company, like targeted workers who were advocating in the plant for the Workers' League, you know, the new union, by withholding bonuses from them and even temporarily laying off 100 workers who they suspected were supporters of the Workers' League. And you know, so Rivera, who we previously quoted from that Labor Notes piece, continued saying, we interpreted the layoffs as retaliation. The way it's worked here in Mexico is that the company chooses the union, which is the CTM. And because various workers weren't going along with having a union imposed on them, they laid us off, end quote. And so, like, it's so, coming from, you know, the U.S. labor context, this is just such a wild situation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the things, and this is why we, you know, why one of the reasons we talk about this struggle so much is that, like, it's already so difficult, I think, a lot of times, like when we see so many struggles here in the U.S., to beat back all the propaganda that you hear from a company about why workers don't need a union, why you'd be better off negotiating directly with the company, the union's just going to take your money, you know, all the stupid lies that they throw out there. But then you add that additional scenario of a company being like, oh no, we're fine with you having a union. We think you should have a union. It should just be this union. Look at the joy in this union. And so, like, then having to bust through that sort of propaganda, I think just goes to show, like, the tenacity of these organizers for these independent unions, and the solidarity that has been shown by so many of these workers willing to stand up and fight for a real union that will actually represent their interests, that will be a union and not a fake company union. And that's the sort of thing that I think we can draw from here, which is why it's been good to see them get support from unions in the U.S. like the UAW. So I think that it's really important that we keep watching these struggles develop because, like, there's a lot of, I think, individual tactics and strategies and just, you know, general inspiration that we can draw from these independent union movements in Mexico.
Absolutely. Well, and Mexico is also just like a really big and important economy that like
Absolutely.
takes up a very prominent space on the world stage. And I think a lot of Americans kind of racistly look down their nose at Mexico and also don't realize like how important what happens in Mexico really is.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, in additional news outside of the U.S. factor, I guess we've been really going with the non-U.S. stories today. We're going to be talking about a Canadian scaffolding company that is basically saying that, well, and they've used the court system to impose this, saying that voluntary overtime and not doing voluntary overtime is considered a strike, because these workers at this scaffolding company have through a work to rule sort of initiative where, you know, it's quote unquote voluntary overtime. They have coordinated where none of the workers participate in that voluntary overtime, and the company has gone to the court systems, which ruled in favor of the company to say that no, this is a strike. When, you know, again, this just really throws the lie to the idea that any of this overtime is voluntary.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, this story is wild. Like, because Vice is reporting on this, and like, we've seen, court injunctions used against strikes all the time in the U.S. To break down picket lines, to say, or especially with like a lot of public workers, government employees, where they say, no, you can't have a strike. I mean, obviously, we've talked about the way the legal system abuses railway workers here in the U.S. But to say that a bunch of people getting together and not refusing to work, just refusing to do what has been told to them is voluntary overtime, that's not only against company policy, that it's not only against the union contract, but that it is illegal, is just absolutely wild. Like they reporting on this because these are workers at a Canadian construction firm called Aluma Safway, who are doing this work at an Alberta job site for one of the biggest oil companies in Canada, Suncor. And they were doing this just because they were like, look, the company's not fucking paying us enough, and the working conditions here suck, and yet they want us to do all this voluntary OT. Let's just refuse to do it as a way to be like, look, we're not going to go on strike. We're going to come in and we're going to put in our normal hours. We're going to do our job. Like our contract says we can't go on strike unless, there's some very specific conditions. So we can't go on strike. But we're not going to give them extra time as long as they're keep treating us shitty like this. And then the company and the court system come back and say, oh, no, you can't do that. You have to work overtime or we're going to throw you in jail. Like, this is one of those things where I just think that it is such an important thing to reflect on the way that the media conditions us to think about the idea of capitalist, quote unquote, democracy, because we constantly hear about how every country outside of the imperial core is an authoritarian country or whatever. And I'm like, are those countries threatening to throw people in jail for not working voluntary, quote unquote, overtime?
Yeah, and the actual ruling is like, it's pretty fucking lame, I gotta say. So the actual ruling of the labor board was, quote, the board finds the employee's concerted refusal to accept overtime shifts for the purpose of compelling the employer to agree to terms and conditions of employment, which constitutes a refusal to work, to be an illegal strike. And it's like, I don't know. Yeah, maybe if you're some dusty old Alberta judge with a bunch of snow between your ears, that makes fucking sense. But it doesn't make any fucking sense to anyone with more than 2 brain cells to rub together, I gotta say.
And I think that your comparison with railway workers is really apt here, because I think that we would not necessarily see this if this was just the scaffolding company was doing maybe a project for, I don't know, affordable housing or something like that. Right. But this is specifically for an oil company, and they're basically using similar tactics to what they've ruled against the Warrior Met people when following the ruling. Aluma Safeway sent a letter to the workers threatening legal action for further refusals to work overtime, including making workers, quote, personally liable for added production costs, penalties owing to the owner, or even the loss of the contract with our client. Basically saying that if your work makes us lose money, we're going to charge you. And again, that being very reminiscent of the U.S.'s NLRB ruling against Warrior Met, where they were charged to pay for the coal company's unmined coal.
Yeah, well, I mean, this has been like a trend in U.S. capitalism for a little while now. Like, you see a lot of companies suing each other or their workers for lost potential profits that were never realized, and they claim those as losses the same way as if they had lost that same amount of money in like inventory or labor time or something, and it's just fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, and so like, just to be clear on like some of the like technicalities here, like I mean, like these workers who are organized under LIUNA, the Laborers International Union, Local 506, their contract does have a no strike clause in it, but that's for a strike. Like every contract, pretty much in the U.S. has a no strike clause. Like even the IWW's Burgerville contract has a no strike clause, because it's unfortunately nearly as bad as no strike clauses are. we argue against them with the slogan of this show. They are unfortunately, just kind of a cost of doing business right now in the status of the labor movement. Hopefully we can fight to rebuild the movement and get away from that. But this idea that refusing to work voluntary overtime counts like that, I think is one of the things that we have to take away from this. And I think it's really well illustrated by the fact that this is, it's not just the company saying this, it's a Canadian court saying this, is that the idea that capital and the state are separate from each other, or that companies hate the state and they don't want it to exist. And because there's this idea, I think some people have this misunderstanding of neoliberalism, that it's the shrinking of the state, that it's companies taking over and getting rid of the state. No. That's not what it is. It's like the state has always been integral to the development of capitalism. And neoliberalism is just revving that up. It is an even more direct alignment of the capitalist state in the interest of the capitalist bosses. And so even though, I think sometimes Americans have this idea that like, Canada is like, it's the nicer, friendlier version of the U.S. where like they've got socialized health care and it's easier to have workers' rights.
I just want to really point out that they absolutely do not, and their system is consistently being privatized piece by piece.
Yeah, but it's the thing is, it's like even if you think like maybe they don't, their state doesn't shoot as many people as the U.S. state does, although ask the First Nations populations in Canada about that. Mm-hmm. The capitalist state, whether it's the U.S., whether it's Canada, whether it's South Africa, that state is operating in the interests of the capitalist class, and it could not be more clear than in a case like this, where you have the threat from the state government to send these workers to jail because they won't work voluntary OT on a program for a giant oil company.
Well, and in other things that couldn't be more clear, the NLRB's button policy has been violated yet again, folks.
That's right.
And Tesla has been doing its best to make sure that workers cannot represent their support of collective activity through union memorabilia and buttons, which, actually I did not know this, but I learned through this that Walmart does have an exception for this.
Yeah.
That was wild to me.
We've talked on the show a few times about, look, the NLRA has some clauses that are murky, and there's been a lot of effort by employers to use the legal system to chip away at some of the places that might be a bit vague, that might leave openings for companies to get in there and say, well, what does this really mean? But that button clause, that one's pretty cut and dried. And so I think it should come as no surprise that if Tesla, the company which brought us cars that decapitate their own drivers and perhaps the most racist auto factory in the country, at least their management, that the way that they would choose to violate labor law would be to violate the most cut and dried provision within it. So what this is all stemming from is Tesla has a dress code policy that they have basically been abusing to prevent workers from wearing any union insignia. And their reasoning for this was so weird. They said that if workers didn't wear just solid black t-shirts or just like a black t-shirt provided by Tesla, it could damage the cars on the line. Which I gotta say, I kind of want to see like their filings in this just to see how they explain that. Because I'm very curious as an engineer how somebody wearing a black t-shirt that has a union logo on it versus a black t-shirt that doesn't have a union logo on it
or that
can
has
somehow impact the production of a car.
But they're also allowed to wear Tesla branded clothes.
Right.
So like, is Tesla using a special secret screen printing process that won't damage the cars? Or are they just quite obviously full of shit? This seems like a great time to apply Occam's razor.
Yeah, which is basically exactly what the NLRB here did.
Right.
Where they came out and said, no, you can't have a dress code policy like that. So NLRB chairperson Lauren McFerrin said of the ruling, With today's decision, the board reaffirms that any attempt to restrict the wearing of union clothing or insignia is presumptively unlawful. And that word in there, presumptively, I think is actually really important in this ruling. Because what that does is that gives workers who are where this policy is violated immediate precedence to be able to say, oh, no, look, there's already a ruling on this. Like, this isn't vague. There's no question here. Like, you cannot have a policy that bans us from wearing pro-union insignia. Like, the only thing in there is, like, if there are accommodations for what type of clothing it is. So, like, for instance, like UPS drivers have like a uniform. And so they can't just wear a shirt that says, like, a Teamster shirt instead of the normal uniform. But they can't ban them from wearing buttons, and that's why we call it the button clause. And so it's the same thing here. They were very easily able to rule against Tesla, and so this is really good because it overturns an older ruling that allowed Walmart to get around this, and so this can immediately then be used by other workers around the country to stop companies from preventing them from being able to show their solidarity outwardly with their union.
Absolutely. Well, and then in our next story, we've got a group of workers organizing with the Teamsters. Workers at Mom's Organic Market in the Hampton neighborhood of Baltimore joined the Service Retail Union Wave on Friday, August 26th, where they voted in a landslide 58-5 to unionize with the Teamsters.
That's really good. And the Teamsters seem like they've really been reaching out to a lot of different sectors of the economy recently, especially like retail service and particularly grocery workers, which has been really cool to see. And it does also seem like the Teamsters can reliably get these landslide votes at a rate that we only have really seen with Starbucks besides them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, this is a pretty simple story here. Mom's Organic Market is a small grocery chain around the Mid-Atlantic. They've got 22 grocery stores, largely focused in Maryland. And they previously have done, we've seen this in so many places, they've tried to hold off unionizing by putting their average wages just slightly higher than average in the area, with starting rates there at $15 an hour. But, of course, as we know, $15 an hour is not a living wage anywhere in the country,
right?
Much less a major city like Baltimore. So workers at Mom's Market reached out to Teamsters Local 570 just a few months ago, actually. That's the other thing I think that's cool about this. This drive didn't actually take that long to come together. And they were focused on, a lot of pretty bread and butter stuff in this case, like better wages, more job security, paid time off, and other benefits. And so, the Teamsters worked with the folks who had reached out to them. They helped them inoculate their coworkers against employer propaganda, and they went and filed for, their NLRB election at 50% union cards in July. And so, they had this massive landslide win with basically, over 90% of workers voting in favor. And so, we have a quote here from worker Kelly Oppenheimer at the store who said, "When you also hear that your coworkers are struggling to pay rent or worried about their job security and maybe figure out their manager didn't like them as much and they got passed up for a raise, it kind of hurts. Being more secure in paying my rent and paying my bills will take a load off." And so, it just really gets to it because it's like a lot of these fights have, very specific angles, but a lot of it just comes down to that fact that it's like, in addition to all of the material problems of not being able to pay your bills, of having to skip meals, which are, of course, horrific. Like the toll of anxiety that not having a secure job with a good wage puts on you is huge. And so it's a huge load off to have something like this. And so, hats off to these workers. The Teamsters are going to start holding meetings with the workers immediately to find out what their main priorities are and then move forward to bargain for that first contract. So very exciting and key, this is a chain. So I really hope that this is not the only one of these, and I would imagine that some more of those 22 locations will be popping up here with union elections probably pretty shortly.
Absolutely. With that landslide victory, I think that we can be kind of hopeful about that. But to move to our next, actually kind of two stories, we're going to be talking about the healthcare industry, where nursing home workers have begun the return of kind of sector-wide bargaining, which we usually only see in like the building trades or in the steel and auto manufacturing. But about 6 weeks ago, on July 12th and 13th, over 1,000 workers in 9 nursing homes in upstate New York held simultaneous strikes. This is the first for them, and there's organized by 1199 SEIU, one of the best SEIU locals that exists.
Yeah, I mean, this is really cool. This is another great story out of Labor Notes. And that's the sectoral bargaining angle of this is what I think is really interesting because, this is 9 different nursing homes, which I believe have 6 different owners. So a couple of them are under like one owner, but this is mostly pretty disparate businesses, but they're all facing very similar conditions that we've seen people face across healthcare. Poverty wages and intentional short staffing to maximize the profits of the ownership. And so since they all have disparate employers, but they all have the same union, again, here, 1199 SEIU, these workers, most of whom are paid just barely over $13 an hour and are required to do the work of multiple people at these homes, came together and said, hey, we could strike individually and it might get us something. But what if we all struck at the same time? And so like these workers they're demanding $15 an hour as the minimum starting wage to go up from there, to have higher wage scales for veteran workers, and for the company to provide additional staff so that they're not so overworked that they can't provide care that the patients really need.
Sure.
And I think one of the things to really emphasize about specifically this nursing home issue is that and of course, check out the Death Panel for all of the really in-depth problems with the sort of carceral setup that we have for treating so many of our elders with these nursing homes. But I mean, even when we look into just the recent issues, these have been the sites of the biggest concentration of COVID deaths, and not just with the patients, but also with the staff. Nearly 20% of the COVID deaths in this country, over 200,000 people, have been in nursing homes or nursing home staff. It is a number that is difficult to comprehend. And yet, in response, have we seen national outrage, a nationalization of this system, maybe a reckoning with the concept of nursing homes in general, and that perhaps we shouldn't just warehouse our elders until they pass away, and that we should actually treat them with respect and dignity that they deserve, or at the very least, provide the staff the pay, benefits, and working conditions that they need to make these places a much better spot for folks to, live out the remainder of their days. No, we haven't seen any of that. Instead, we've seen the private nursing home operators that run these facilities following the same logic of capital that we've seen so many other places follow. Instead of hiring more staff, instead of installing new ventilation, providing better wages and conditions, they've done the opposite. They've refused to hire staff while increasing enrollment. And so, there's been really no other option but to strike for these workers.
And in fact, these business owners have coordinated with one another in order to strategically not meet the workers' demands. I mean, there were 9 facilities that went on strike, but there were 3 other ones that actually did cave to the workers' demands before they even went on strike. And I think that shows how powerful it is when you get all of these workers together and have them go at the same time, because price fixing is illegal, but for some reason price fixing the cost of your laborers' wages doesn't seem to be illegal, or if it is, it's seldom to never enforced. And so when the unions did propose a potential strike, 98.6 of them voted in favor of it. And then when they unified and put the pressure on the companies, despite all of that, there still has not been a final deal reached to solve the problems at these facilities. So the workers are clearly committed to continuing their struggle, even if it includes more and longer strikes, which I have to guess will probably work, just judging from the fact that 3 of the facilities caved before they even went on the first one. And as Rebecca Pettis, who is a cook and one of the bargaining committee members, told Labor Notes, quote, "We will fight as long as everybody wants to. And if they want the outcome of better wages, that's what we have to do. Keep fighting." And I have have to imagine if 98.6% of them voted in favor of the strike, they probably will keep fighting pretty fucking hard.
Well, yeah,
Absolutely.
and I think that one of the things to highlight here is even with those companies going like conceding and giving the workers what they demand, they still go on strike because then that still puts pressure on the sector. I think that
Sure.
is really, really important to though you got your needs or your demands met, even in part, that does not mean that the strike is off. That means that you have been winning and that you can win more.
Yeah, well, and it's especially important with like medical related services because I think a lot of people think sector-wide stuff has to be a whole state or the whole country or it's not going to work. But proximity of medical facilities to one another that provide the same services is really important. And if you have 9 that are near each other that don't have staff on the same days, I mean, you really do develop a lot of regional leverage with that.
Absolutely. Well, and in the thought of creating leverage, the Minnesota Nurses Association has announced that 15,000 nurses throughout the state plan to go on strike for 3 days on September 12th. After a vote last month when the nurses overwhelmingly supported the authorization of the potential walkout. The strike is set to impact 16 hospitals across the state. This is going to, when it comes to labor history, we have a lot of stuff written down, but also, the data is not always easy to parse, but it's kind of believed that this is going to be the largest private sector nurses strike in U.S. history.
Yeah. I mean, 15,000 nurses. That is huge. It's incredible, but it only makes sense. I mean, how many stories have we covered on this show about the way that healthcare workers, nurses, hospital staff, everybody has been treated during this pandemic? It's honestly incredible that, the entire healthcare system hasn't completely collapsed, like considering how awful these folks are treated. Like, and this also, again, and despite the way the media always portrays nurses' strikes, this is not, some hasty decision. They have been negotiating without a contract for almost 6 months and only now are taking this step. And again, they authorized this weeks ago. So they've given the ownership of these hospitals tons of time to come to the table and have made it more than clear. It's like, we're serious about this, but like, we'll negotiate, but you have to come and actually negotiate with us. And yet still, we see how far they are apart when we look into, the issues that they're negotiating over. Like per the reporting from CBS, like nurses are aiming for a 30% wage increase over the course of a 3-year contract to help address current low wages that they're facing and also deal with the, massive inflation that we're seeing right now. And I know that 30% might seem huge to some people, but when you've had years of stagnant wages, and when you're facing conditions like this where, this is a job where you are going in and maybe you might not come home, because that's I don't think people really sometimes appreciate how dangerous being a healthcare worker can really be. So combine that with the current level of inflation, combine that with the massive level of burnout faced by so many workers, combine that with the way that hospitals are trying to get around this by replacing nurses with travel nurses, just exacerbating all of these problems and making them worse. That 30% sounds completely reasonable, I think, to me. And yet the offer we get from the hospitals organizing together is, what if we give you an 11% raise? Look how huge that is. And again, this is over a 3-year contract. So it's not like an immediate 30% or immediate 11% raise. It's spread over 3 years. So that 11% that the hospitals are offering, that would barely cover this year's inflation.
Yeah.
So who knows how much it's going to be next year and the year after. And it's already, the whole thing's been eaten up in the first year. And the hospitals are declaring that what the nurses are asking for is unreasonable.
Yeah, well, and I mean, they're also the hospitals are also fighting tooth and nail to make sure that they don't have to hire anybody else, which is another core issue that the nurses are trying to get solved, which is that a huge part of the reason this is so dangerous and a huge part of the reason there are much worse health outcomes for their patients than there need to be is because hospitals, which are one of the most disastrous places to implement lean style business management, have adopted, surprise, surprise, lean style business management and and all the just in time and all of the other hyper capitalist bullshit that makes every other industry paper thin. And to have paper thin supports in a healthcare environment is just wildly irresponsible. I mean, you don't even need to be a socialist to realize that, but I think it probably does help. So the Minnesota Reformer also noted that a recent report from the Minnesota Department of Health shows adverse health effects were up 33% in 2021 from 2020 and last year. Nurses filed nearly 8,000 reports of unsafe staffing levels, which is an increase of 300% from 2014. ER wait times. So that can't possibly just be COVID. Like from 2014, that's right. Just labor intensification in many respects leading up to the last few years. ER wait times have hit highs of over 14 hours for some patients. Meanwhile, hospital CEOs rake in multi-million-dollar salaries. And you have Chris Rubesh, who is an RN at Essentia in Duluth and first vice president of the Minnesota Nurses Association, saying, quote, "Corporate healthcare policies in our hospitals have left nurses understaffed and overworked. While patients are overcharged, local hospitals and services are closed, and executives take home million-dollar paychecks. Nurses have one priority in our hospitals, to take care of our patients, and we are determined to fight for fair contracts so nurses can stay at the bedside to provide the quality care our patients deserve." And I mean, that's just something we talk about all the time on this show, especially when it comes to industries like healthcare and education, which it pains me to even refer to as industries. Those should just be public services, for God's sake.
Yeah. And so they'll be on strike from the 12th, the 13th, and the 14th. So if you're in Minnesota, I mean, this is going to be all over the state. Mm-hmm. Like there's multiple hospitals in Minneapolis. So like if you have the opportunity to if there's a picket line near you, we certainly recommend, if you have a chance, and you can go down and show your solidarity, show that you stand with those nurses to help, not just them, but all of us. Because that's the thing. COVID is still a huge fucking problem. Mm-hmm. 40,000 people have died in the United States of COVID in the last 100 days. And a not insignificant part of that, those numbers, is not just the complete abdication of any attempts to stop the spread of COVID. It's also because nurses are run so thin by exactly what you're saying, this application of lean processes to hospitals, that they can't provide the care that they want to because you have one nurse who's now doing the job of what in, say, even just a few years ago would have been 2, 3, 4 nurses. So this affects all of us. And it's so important that we support, these nurses and all the healthcare workers in these efforts.
Well, and I could hear you hesitating. You almost said lean manufacturing because that really feels like what is happening here in these health facilities, which, similar to the retirement facilities, can be used to warehouse people, and we know that it's basically just a mechanical device meant to, gather profits at the expense of all of the people involved who are not the ruling class.
Yeah, 100%. So, shouts out to these nurses.
Absolutely. And to move to some presumably good news. I mean, it is good news. Amazon's challenges to the ALU's victory at JFK 8 have been thrown out by the Arizona Region 28 NLRB office, where Amazon said there was undue influence from the NLRB itself and from the ALU. This was like the weed smoking and all the other bullshit claims that they had. And so even though they have made this really ridiculous claim that then made the case itself be moved out of the New York NLRB region to this Phoenix, Arizona region, even that more conservative board has ruled in favor of the Amazon labor union and the workers there that have unionized, though I think that one of the things that we need to temper this with is the fact that there are still, until the 16th of this month, objections able to be filed by Amazon, and it's very likely that Amazon will contest the NLRB's ruling on this to then bring it to the court system. And so we know how we feel about the courts, but, sometimes when the NLRB has already ruled on something, it does give a little bit of sway to the courts. We'll have to see.
Yeah. I sat through a few, not even a majority of those, because they did this all over Zoom, these virtual hearings, and because it's a public it's the NLRB. It's open to the general public to watch. And the stuff that Amazon was raising as objections were completely nonsensical. Like you could tell just from sitting through it that nobody bought it. It was just completely ludicrous. But that's the thing that's so frustrating about this is that Amazon's got all the time in the world to just waste everybody's time and throw their infinite monetary resources at a million lawyers to throw all these challenges. So I'm sure they will challenge it, but this is still big. Like as you said, Lena, it's not that this we're not trying to say this doesn't matter. This is a really big ruling, and so hopefully this is at least a sign that we're not going to see any real chance of victory here. And so we have a quote from Chris Smalls in response to this, just saying, after dealing with all that virtual court, it feels good to finally have some celebratory news. We're hoping that the NLRB certifies it so we can get some rights in the building and protect workers in the building, end quote. So
Absolutely.
Hell yeah.
And then we kind of, at the end of every episode, we've been doing these Starbucks segments, but I actually kind of want to do a little bit of this ALU Starbucks crossover in regards to Labor Day, which happened yesterday, Monday the 5th.
Two great tastes that taste great together.
Absolutely, where the ALU and Starbucks Workers United held a joint rally and rallied outside of Howard Schultz's $40 million penthouse, and then marched from that penthouse to Jeff Bezos' penthouse with shouting all sorts of slogans like "fuck Howard Schultz" and "fuck Jeff Bezos," and it was really, really cool. There was also this one cool video that came out of it where there's actually an Amazon delivery person walking past the rally, and Chris Smalls is like, "Oh man, we got to get you a union card," and it was really a good thing, and those videos are very heartening to see.
Yeah, the footage from that rally was really cool because, in addition, to see that joint solidarity movement between the ALU and Starbucks Workers United, there were so many other representatives of so many of these other movements. I know one of the main organizers for the Bamazon Union Drive down in Bessemer was there at that rally. There were there was a whole bunch of other ones. It was just really cool to see that, Labor Day coming together, because that's one of the things we talk about so much is the need for labor unity, not to have all the struggles of the different labor unions individualized and separated apart. And so seeing workers come together around that is just really awesome. And so in that vein, this week was a little slow in terms of elections for Starbucks Workers United, but it was not slow in terms of actions because, it's Labor Day weekend. So, you got an insurgent labor movement. You got to do something big for Labor Day weekend. And so we've talked, I think, before in the past about one of the tactics that Starbucks has been using to do Starbucks Workers United, has been doing for community outreach, for support for their union drives has been what they've been calling sip-ins, where, people come in and they either get a water or something really cheap and then leave a big tip and show that hey, we support your union. We're going to come in, we're going to order something under the name Union Strong or whatever. And just to show the workers there, hey, no matter what your managers are telling you, no matter what sort of oppressive measures they're taking, the community has your back. But for this weekend, rather than, having there be one here and one there, the union movement held over 100 sip-ins across the country for this weekend to show, big nationwide support for the union. And alongside, strikes, rallies, all sorts of other events. And one of the things that I think has been so good to see about a lot of the energy coming out of, these new union movements, including Starbucks Workers United, is this acknowledgement that labor has to be involved in all of the struggles of the working class. One of the things that we hammer on so much here, because there was a quote about these sip-ins from an interview within these times where Tyler DeGuerre, who's an organizer in Boston, said about the need for unions to do that, saying, so long as we're upholding one system of oppression, we're therefore justifying our own. So it really needs to be a collective movement of intersectional solidarity.
Hell yeah.
Yeah,
I've been actually
that's
seeing in interviews with Starbucks workers that the class consciousness is really blooming. Like, I think that, there was always a little bit there. I mean, being a worker does lend itself to having a little bit of class consciousness, but a lot of these worker leaders that are coming out of the Starbucks Workers United movement are speaking the language of socialism. They're straight up talking about worker struggle and class struggle, and it's truly a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah. And so we did have one really interesting announcement over the past few days. So we knew that when Howard Schultz came back to be CEO, that he was going to be like the interim CEO.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now they've hired a new one. And Howard Schultz has announced that he will be stepping down next year. Hopefully after, depending on if we see any legal challenges to the ruling from last week, hopefully after being forced to deliver a video explaining why workers' rights are something that he's not allowed to violate.
I can't wait. That's going to be one of the weirdest videos I've ever seen in my life, because it's going to be damning with faint praise as much as he can get away with it.
I just literally, when I picture what it's going to be, is I picture that image of Jordan Peterson crying in front of his web camera.
Yeah, absolutely. Now it's just going to be like Howard Schultz with Kermit voice. But unfortunately, all the news isn't all fantastic. Starbucks has continued, despite the fact that there have now been multiple court rulings telling them they can't do this shit. Because we talked about, the ruling that said that they have to rehire the Memphis 7. Well, they've gone out and fired a bunch of more organizers. They fired 6 organizers in Anderson, South Carolina on September 2nd. He fired these workers for the horrible crime of, after they had a 3-day strike. Again, to be clear, Starbucks is very much saying they're not firing these workers for holding a 3-day strike. It's for after the 3-day strike, going to the store and cleaning the store and prepping it to be open after the strike.
Wow. How could they do such a thing? I need the clip of that British guy going, "I can't believe you've done this."
I can't believe you've done this.
Yeah. So it's horrible. So there's a support fund for these workers that we will put in the description, and of course, as always with these, if any support that we can provide these workers is important, because we have to show that, look, Starbucks can do all this shit outside the law, but as workers, as members of the same class, we're going to come together and support each other and keep these sorts of actions from being able to have the demobilizing effect that they want.
Yeah, there's been so many different funds for all of these fired workers and all of these new organizing drives. I think one of the things I'm going to do in later today is actually literally create a solidarity fund channel in the Discord, because they get a little buried sometimes in the worker news channel, because the worker news channel is so busy in our server. So just to make sure people can access that a little bit faster if you happen to be in the Discord. But back to what Dan was saying at the beginning of this, with there not being, I couldn't really find if there were election counts that were held this week. It seemed like maybe this was just a lull in the ratification counts, but at the very least, we did see more stores filing, including one store in Boston, which filed with 100% of workers signing cards, which is a very, very cool thing.
Way to go, Boston.
Yeah, that rules. And we are, as far as we are aware, we are still at 235 unionized stores. And honestly, considering that's 235 stores that have unionized in less than a year, I think they can have a week off and still be pretty incredible.
Yeah, have
Absolutely.
a sit down. My goodness.
Absolutely. Well, let's move to, again, our normal weekly segment at the end of the show, end of the show, not just the end of the news portion of the show, the meme review, where we're actually doing a meme that I did an edit of that I really liked, and so I wanted to bring my own meme in here.
Yeah, so I think this is from Pillars of Eternity.
It's either that or it's oh shit, I just had it in my head. It's one of those isometric RPG Dungeons and Dragons style games where, you move the characters around, and this is in a dungeon and there's a giant gold pile, but it's labeled empty.
Yeah, so this is one of those quirks of those isometric RPGs where you can interact with the environment, but you don't actually see any visual change when you like take something out of it. So there's this massive pile of gold, but it's just labeled gold pile parentheses empty. And so Lena's put this caption on it here, which I think is very appropriate, just labeled companies explaining why you have to take a pay cut.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we see every single fucking episode of this show where we're like, the company has complained that nobody wants to work anymore and that it's too expensive to pay their workers $12 an hour. The CEO made $62 bajillion this year.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like with the Royal Mail thing we were talking about last week. We're like, we can't give people raises. We have to be competitive. We might have to break up the company. And then they're like, you made 400 million pounds in profit last month.
Well, speaking of somebody who should be paid 400 million pounds per annum, we have a image here of a very good dog who is watching over a whole litter of very small kittens, and it just says, "When you lie on your resume, but still get the job." I have a feeling this pup's going to do a great job.
I mean, that's the thing. They tell you, oh, you got to be truthful on your resume because what if you get the job and you can't do it? And like, well, honestly, that's why you should invest in some training.
Yeah, for real.
Because whatever your resume says, every job's different. And it looks like this dog, who you wouldn't expect to be able to take care of these cats, seems to be doing just fine. So
Absolutely.
the resume is not as important.
Yeah, my
as the
resume just
intelligence.
says, "My name's John. I can learn how to do anything in one day." Experience, see above.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, and then this other one is a meme that was going around on Labor Day, where I don't know who this probably actor guy is.
Yeah, this is Daniel Craig. This is a picture from when he was
SNL.
hosting
Bond.
SNL.
Right, and it just says captioned "Unions in 1932," and he's reading. It says, "Ladies and gentlemen, the weekend," which I'm guessing is actually a reference to the band or the
the
group,
performer.
or the performer,
The Canadian 80s revival artist, The Weeknd.
It's very good, absolutely.
There's a whole
then-
Twitter
yeah.
account that's just, I think it's called something like SNL hosts introducing the musical act, and they have them from all the different decades that SNL has run. And some of them are really funny, like just comedians and actors that you can tell are not familiar with or definitely not into the act that they're introducing. Very good shit.
Yeah, it's like when they have like Alec Baldwin on there for the 20th time.
Yeah.
And he's just like, ladies and gentlemen, LMFAO.
Yeah, or like Christopher Walken, like, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Arctic Monkeys."
Yeah. Oh, man. So we've got another very much like Labor Day specific meme from, favorite meme page of the show, Cats with Hard Hats.
Hell yeah.
We've got, your typical cat in a hard hat sitting there next to an antique era truck out by a farm. And it's just captioned, "Happy Labor Day. Never work again."
Ooh,
This cat's got the right
nice.
idea.
I finally have a job where I have things like Labor Day off. And I was sitting around the house yesterday thinking to myself, Monday should just be part of the weekend at this point, just permanently.
Right?
And we should move things like Labor Day to Tuesday.
Well, because that's the thing. People are like, how do we deal with unemployment? I'm like, reduce the work week length
Yeah.
immediately.
Yeah.
There you go. Unemployment solved. But they definitely love this sentiment from our favorite hardworking cats.
Well, and
That's right.
another thing we love is polling sentiment. Whenever we see a poll online, that's the kind of thing that makes it into every single show, which is exactly why it's in every single show and not one of the first times we've ever brought a polling sentiment into
I want to
here.
see a serious outlet do this to an actual poll. Like, just use a graphic that looks like this.
I mean, what was it? Andrew Yang tweeted a bar graph to express percentages pretty recently. That had my head fucking spinning.
Oh my gosh! What terrible! I don't want to get into that.
What a fucking
All right, so
idiot,
this is a chart labeled dopamine released by various activities. Baseline is 100%. Food slightly higher, video games slightly higher, sex just slightly higher than video games, cocaine like 1.5 times that of sex, like, or 2.5 times that of sex, than amphetamines, which I thought cocaine was an amphetamine, but
Nope.
anyway, that no.
Just similar
Yeah.
effects. Yeah, it's a stimulant, but not amphetamine.
Okay. Anyway, that's like twice as high as cocaine. Methamphetamine higher than that, and then winning a union. It's just this line that's coiling around the whole bottom of this graphic. As the line is seriously 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then extending off the page times as long as every other line. And it's very true. If you ever won a union, that is how it feels.
It's also the first thing on this list that's not going to have adverse effects on your life or your body, since sex.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, really, that's the thing. You know, I mean, not to have the serious take during the meme review, but like genuinely, there are very few highs as good as actual solidarity in practice.
Absolutely. We got that wholesome content to wrap up the episode.
That's right. I mean, what else feels that good? Realizing you're dreaming, and then you can control the dream and win a union in your dream, I guess. It all comes back around.
Yeah, there we go. We did it, folks. And with that, we want to thank you for listening. If you want to support us, you can support us at patreon.com/workstoppage. We are entirely listener supported, so that contribution helps us do this show. And if you want to hang out with us or any of the other comrades that are listening to the show and supporting other workers, you can jump in the Discord. There is a link to the Discord in the description right next to all of those solidarity funds. You can leave us a review somewhere. You can follow John on Twitter at FacebookVillain. Follow the pod at WorkStoppagePod. Listen to Beep Beep Lettuce. Listen to Red Game Table. And as always, labor peace is not in our interest, and solidarity forever.
That's right. Solidarity.
Solidarity, everybody.